Welcome, friends, to another episode of the Melted Wax podcast. I'm your host, PC at DPZ, or just DPZ. And with me, I have Rodney Vallejo at Rodfest, his IG.
What's up? Thanks, Dennis. Appreciate it.
What's up, buddy? Hey, so, I think we're launching into the new year. Last time we had you on, we were talking about a lot of these cool Griffey cards. And I know everybody knows you as Mr. Griffey. But today I'm going to ask you about broader questions because there's a lot of folks that watch this show and, they want to talk about all kinds of different players. And I know you have an appreciation for all cards. I know you do. So, and the collecting community, you've been collecting for so long. There's no way you don't. So you have great knowledge. So the first question I'm going to ask you, we're now into we're a month into this new year. What's it look like to you? What does the market look like? What do you see happening in the hobby in 2024?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question. But first, there's plenty other guys that are Griffey guys before me. So it's kind of a Mr. Griffey is a strong term, but I know you say it with love. Yeah. Because but back to the hobby, it's I think it's going to be a telltale year, and we're still in a market downturn, just straight up front, and we have been pretty much since the National in August. There were some strong sales, on the floor throughout the National, and then obviously some cards that sold at auction through PWCC and Golden, that ended that weekend of the National. So it all timed up nicely, but since then we've seen pretty much a strong downturn in terms of price and demand across the board in all sports. I'm just mostly specifically talking about the main sports because I don't follow anything mostly outside of basketball, football, and of course baseball. And these are the big cards that you see either constantly being sold, bought, and then resold, months later. So it is, you always have that speculative aspect of the hobby, whatever time of year it is. But you've seen within the last 6 to 8 months. Since then, since mid 2023, cars reselling for lower and lower and lower. And obviously that happens, you're going to get a lower price if you see the same car that was supposed to be never seen, comes to market and available again, or people are selling off to try and recoup something during the market downturn or because of the market downturn. That's right. Also contributing to the lower prices. And, the macro view of it is what's been going on in the economy. There was always a talk of some form of a recession that happened at some point in 23, and while that didn't necessarily happen, obviously everyone knows inflation really hurt just the bottom line of the average consumer in the country. And whether that is more money is going towards non-hobbies like cards, or just people are a little bit more tight-fisted just because of the economic situation in the United States, and then just kind of instability in the areas that our country is involved in. I'm not going to go down the political route, but you can't ignore kind of the world geopolitical landscape that we're in. And then kind of leading to where we are now, I think that obviously in November, the Fed said that they don't expect to raise interest rates again. And, that does have a big, obviously, impact on not only inflation and the CPI, but also then, of course, on the housing market. Yeah. And just that you saw there, the stock market, I think, was really strong the day or two right after that announcement. That outlook and that forecast for 24. And, as long as there's buyer confidence in the market, and I'm not trying to claim an economist, everything I'm saying here is pretty much regurgitated from, podcasts that I listen to. The people that I'm listening to are saying that, based on what the Fed said, which is a fact, and based on or not a fact, they believe they're not going to raise the interest rates. That gives some people hope. And granted, our inflation, year over year compared to last year at this point, it's lower, but it's still very high. There is just some confidence, I think, based off of what's going on. So I don't know if we're in the bottom of the market right now yet. I still see some cards, our focus is on 90s. You still see some cards sell for higher, some then go for lower, and you're like, well, it's kind of just still in flux. But I think that over time we're just going to have to see. And maybe I'm just naturally optimistic, but
Yeah.
I think that can we go lower? Yeah, theoretically we could on prices for sale of cards and demand, but I imagine that can't go on forever given what we're seeing in macro. But who knows? Again, that's just me being optimistic. I think that the demand will slowly go back up and prices will continue to at least stabilize from the free fall, and hopefully they do go up. Because
Well, I think certain cards will do that, though. I think you got certain cards and certain certain players that you're collecting, players markets, if you want to use that word, will maintain. And I think there's going to be a floor there that, you're going to almost like people will protect it. I don't know if people are going to go out and buy duplicates to protect it, and I don't think hope there's no shilling to protect it. Who knows? But you'd almost see a price protection at some point with some of these cards, or people are just going to swoop in and grab them because they're going to be such amazing steals. I wonder how that behavior informs the market. And I also think when it comes to inflation, I think 2.5% as a baseline I think we're not going to get there. I think that's not something that's going to happen anymore. I think we got to kind of bump it up 3%. So I think we're closer than we want to be. Consumer confidence is they're spending. They spent through Christmas.
Yeah.
Now they're kind of holding back. Everybody's like, reevaluating finances in the new year. That tends to happen. But when it comes to the housing market and how that influences our economy and the rates and all that, I think people are nervous about leaving 3 and 4% behind.
Oh yeah, they're not going to want that.
They don't want to do that. And I think, here's the other thing though too, inventory is low. This is turning into an economics podcast, but inventory is low.
Yeah.
I work in the banking sector, so I live this stuff. I mean, there is not enough housing for sale in the country that they'll meet the demand. But then there's also a price issue too. There's the pricing issues is where the inflation comes into play, and you also have to figure in interest rates are going to scare people away. A drop in 1% can mean a meaningful material difference in payment. So that keeps the market kind of like stagnant. Now with cards, when people are having those types of conversations, they're not thinking about buying a card. So yes, this is the last thing they think about. But I do believe that there are certain cards and players markets that sort of are survivable. They have this way to poke through. I wanted to ask you, and we're just hitting right to it. I like hitting right to it. People like hearing the point right away. I want to ask you, who are the top 5, in your opinion, the top 5 most collectible players markets that you feel confident about no matter what the market is doing?
Oh, okay. So in no order, but actually the first one is Jordan. So Jordan. I mean, that is an order.
Yeah. Jordan.
I'd go Jordan, and this is it may sound biased, but I mean, 90s is a staple for a reason, and it does obviously hold a candle at least to modern. But if I'm talking about like staple, like conservative maintaining value, then it's Jordan, it's Kobe, it's in baseball, it's Griffey, it's Jeter, in football, it's Jerry Rice, it's Barry Sanders. I'm probably going to get shot by people online for not remembering a specific player. Like, hey, you forgot some of this guy. And modern right now, like I have to say Brady, obviously, and modern during our time, and then obviously modern through now. And then Mahomes. So you hold Brady. Brady's not going anywhere. Mahomes is obviously he could stop his career now and he'd be a Hall of Famer, I think, But beyond that, you have the stalwarts in basketball. Same, and then I didn't say LeBron James, but LeBron James is there too. But Jordan immediately comes to mind. And it goes back to what you were saying a little bit earlier is you have certain players that, these are the guys that kind of are the stalwarts and the staples of the market. When you see their card, any of those players' cards, like their best or one of the top most recognizable in-demand cards, stabilize and hold a price, even if they go down, it's almost like that's what the market reacts to, because everything, they are at the top of the chain in their respective sport and
Yep.
in the hobby,
Right.
and everything is a trickle down from there. So if Griffey prices are down, then guess what? Pretty much every other price is going to be down, unless you're talking about like a Jeter 96 Mirror Gold. And even then, that may be relatively down to what it should be. However, on that point, if you look about where we were pre-COVID, before all the shutdown, the shutdown and the stimulus checks that went out, the market, the prices that I've seen in basketball and baseball, I know baseball way more than basketball, so I'm not claiming to be an expert in basketball. They're higher than they were in 2019. So it's like you had this steady, gradual rise. I'm specifically talking, Griffey in 90s baseball and everything below and in between. It's slowly gone up, from 2014, 2015, started to go up. And then 2019 hit and, things were looking good. Then 2020, there's a spike. Everything went up and then it's coming all down. But now, is it leveling off? If it did right now, it would still be the prices for Griffeys in general for 90s rares is higher than it was in 2018, 2019. So it's like you can't eliminate those 3 years due to the shutdowns. But if you were looking at this zoomed out, you would see that the trend would continue to slowly plateau and increase even with that spike. So,
and I think basketball, you can apply the same concept to the basketball market with some of those cards, the EC, the essential credentials, the PMGs, the Flair Brilliance, 24Ks. I mean, all these different sets like Flair Mystique. I'm obviously a huge fan of Flair Mystique. All these different sets with unique cards that are very sought after, that are very appealing, very aesthetically pleasing. These cards seem to be okay.
Yes,
I mean, they hold value for even just, the common players, or just the baseline Hall of Famers,
And during this time, like within the last 6 to 8 months, like I said, there have been cards that sold publicly that you've seen. You're like, oh wow, I've never seen these cards, and you're like, why are they coming out of the woodworks? Well, is this person selling off, or is it because of the market? But there are cards that sold privately, exchange hands. Jordans, Griffeys, Kobe Bryant's, that the only one I know, and there's probably more out there. They sold for record prices, never before like heard of and seen, and you don't see that on Card Ladder. But they exchange hands at those prices, and even there are some on Card Ladder that cards that sold during this time that sold at all-time highs, and it's like those are the stabilizers. And then you also mentioned, Dennis, about how people are buying up duplicates. The people that can do that, they're saying that this is a great time to buy. Like, even just, it doesn't have to be some super high-end 5-6 figure card. It can just be a $1 to $2 to $3,000 card, and you're getting it for lower than it was obviously in 2021, and maybe only slightly higher than it was in 2019. So again, you're still getting a long-term value. And then that's why I think it's, I come back to always the fall. I'm a little bit more optimistic. So I'm with you there. Well, but you can't, I know you joked about this, and we're not trying to sound this like as an economic pod, but you can't ignore those factors. So.
Yeah, you can. And I think that if you're someone that's willing to go buy a second copy, that shows your optimism, your confidence in that, and the market, and in the cards itself being something they're gonna hold value down the road. We always go back and forth on cards investments or cards just stores of value. I kind of go back and forth. I think I'm arriving, and I'm gonna stay in a place where I feel like some cards can be investments depending on which card, the set, all that stuff, the player, and sometimes the set rules the way. And some cards are just great stores of value for now. Some cards are just you're just a hobby. They're fun. You're not gonna, and it gets more exciting, and people don't want to talk about this, but I think it does. Let's go buy the less expensive stuff and just collect a bunch of it. To me, for me at least, and everybody does it different. There's nothing wrong with doing it anyway. You just enjoy the hobby however you please, and you can afford to do it responsibly, all of that. but it's exciting to get a card that you
Mhm.
know is rare, that
Yeah.
nobody else might have, or there's like very limited supply, limited transactional history. It's
Mhm.
got a story, there's provenance behind it, all that. There's something about that that makes that experience in the card and owning it and holding it and being the steward of it, it gives you a different feeling, and it makes
Yeah.
it special. You cannot
Mhm.
get that feeling out of a card that's really liquid or very common. It's just hard. Maybe you're trying to put together a fun little set. Like for me right now, I'm doing the whole 97 finest basketball
Yeah.
embossed
Yeah.
refractor set. I'm not getting nines and tens. I got a couple nines maybe, but I've got mostly eights and sevens. I
Yeah.
still got to get the grip. I got to get the Kobe and the
Mhm.
Jordan and the Shaq are probably going to be the more expensive ones, but I'm trying to get everybody else before that. And some of them are just really hard to find. They're not a lot of them
Yeah.
graded. And I bought a
Yeah.
bunch of raw and I sent them in. It's kind of exciting. I got
Yeah.
about 20 of them. And there's like, I think
Uh-huh.
50 of the Hall of Famers. I'm trying to collect all the Hall of Famers. That's exciting. And that's not super expensive, but it's also a very rare, very appealing, very cool. I think down the road, cards, a little fun run like that, I think
Mhm.
will be valuable regardless of
Yeah.
grade
I
because of
mean,
the way they're made. They're just a rough set. They're hard. They're cut weird. And so
yeah. But and then also they go across multiple sports, and they're bolstered again by the superstars or legends of that generation that
exactly.
this current generation are still appreciating, whether it is
Exactly.
in basketball, football, or baseball.
The
Yeah.
crossover effect, you've talked about that a lot. Let's
Yeah.
talk about that for a second. The
Mhm.
crossover effect from set to set, from sport to sport. Talk to me about why that is important.
Well, I think the hobby now is driven mostly by basketball collectors. Not saying that there are more basketball collectors than baseball or football, but just the demand and what you see, the movement of cards that are involved, the higher figure, dollar figure cards, they're all coming, not all, the majority of them are coming from basketball. So when you have a strong collector base that basketball has always had, and you combine that with Hall of Famers and plus a guy like Michael Jordan, who is a worldwide known icon, um, you're going to see obviously a higher demand for Jordan cards or anybody from the 90s, and even like for now, LeBron, Steph. Um, and I'd be remiss again to Shaq and Kobe. I'm not trying to overlook them, but because there is such a strong basketball foundation, like they're driving their hobby. And I feel like before COVID and everything was shut down, maybe I wasn't aware to it. I wasn't aware of collectors from basketball kind of going after baseball stuff or football stuff. And, that's probably me not knowing, the people that I do now. But I just feel like there was beyond just, the spikes from when everything was shut down. It just seemed naturally like it just felt like there were more basketball guys. Hey, this essential credential set is so popular here in basketball, and prices are so expensive, but in baseball, they're not. So why don't we just go after some Hall of Fame stars here? And I'm not saying that that's how it was, but that's like an easy way that you could look at it. But when you love a set so much, like precious metal gems, essential credentials, platinum, medallions, star rubies, and you see those in other sports like football of Jerry Rice or Barry Sanders, or the 97 star rubies is so popular, but wasn't in baseball, but they have it in basketball and football. Then it's like, well, wait a minute, why don't I get, so then I'm not saying it started in 2019. It's just something that I became aware of a lot more. And it's probably because I started to meet more basketball collectors and football collectors from, going to the national and, groups and, social media. But when you have that effect, then it doesn't matter what sport that you're collecting. And, I haven't mentioned hockey nearly as much. Obviously, if I did earlier, I would have said Gretzky's like obviously the stalwart in
Yeah.
hockey.
Yeah.
But I think with hockey, there just weren't as many crossover sets, and I'm not saying that's a reason for why that hobby isn't as, let's say, popular or have as many high dollar sales of cards. But like they had a crossover set with 96 Select Certified, which is probably one of the more important sets in baseball.
Mhm.
But 96 Pinnacle didn't make basketball cards, so there's no that's not in basketball. there was a football, baseball, and hockey version of Select Certified. And then 97 SPX was probably the only crossover set across all 4 sports. And my buddy, GM pal from the Facebook groups, he was the one, he and I were asking me, he goes, is there a set that crosses over? I'm like, other than 98 Ultra? I'm like, no, 98 Ultra doesn't, I don't think hockey is that. Check me on that one, any hockey fans. But that's the thing, the crossover effect. But then when you have like the more popular sports in the United States is baseball, football, basketball. And when you have a precious metal gem set in baseball, football, basketball, Star Rubies Extreme, Platinum and Diamonds, 24 karat golds, there's a reason why those are, some of the more popular ones. Yes, they were popular in baseball. Yes, they were popular in basketball. When they all combine, then you're going to get a set and you're going to see an explosion in demand like you have even through the spike, but it's still maintained now. PMGs, Essential Credentials, Star Rubies, like those have not, they're still crazy high. If anything, the demand increased over the last 3 years. And it doesn't seem like it's going away anywhere, because you're getting more people that are collecting, and those cards are finite. So like when you only see 50 Star Rubies from 97 in basketball and football, and your demand base is so much bigger and continues to grow and the supply stays the same, then you're going to get these prices.
Because, well, it's interesting too, because you have numbered sets, you have these really cool inserts and stuff like that they put out these now in modern and ultra modern, but they're nothing. The aesthetics, like if you've ever held a Raise the Roof basketball Flair Mystique in your hand, established.
I haven't.
Oh, huh?
I haven't. The closest thing I have is the Shining Stars in baseball. That was like the equivalent, but they weren't serial numbered.
Yeah, so. I've held. I used to have a Duncan just because I wanted to own one. That's the only time I've ever just bought a card because I just want to hold it in my hand.
Yeah,
I wasn't going to keep it. I just wanted to hold it in my hand for a little bit because it was just like, and then getting it and looking at it and holding it and going, they just don't. And it's like that classic saying, they don't make cards like they used to. They don't make a card like
because they don't.
It does not exist. I mean, and
they can try.
They try. Don't get me wrong. I'm a big Essential Credentials fan. I even like the Essential Credentials for baseball and football and how they have that really cool. And basketball's just the very plain. But the Essential Credentials are cool, but they're nothing. They can't even. I mean, now they're more valuable and they're probably more sought after, but they cannot hold a candle to a 24 karat gold or Raise the Roof. To me, those are two of the most beautiful cards ever created. I mean, I used to put the embossed refractor die cut gold refractors up there.
Yeah.
They're really cool. But I think it's just those two sets and everything else. And that's my opinion. But I believe those two sets, those cards, and those cards are in high demand. And people are buying random whatever players for good money, $200 or $300 for a raw, what Scott Knope or something like, whoever, like some random guy that played for a minute. It's those cards and they're serial numbered very low. They're very sought after. They're very important. I find it interesting that those cards aren't because they're so gorgeous, aren't more popular than the ECs and the PMGs. Because I have a PMG and it's nice, but it's it's nothing like those two sets. Those two sets, you can't. To me, it's just them and then everybody else. And I think because of that, people go and they want to gravitate towards those sets. And that's why you see some of these. I mean, PMGs are beautiful, don't get me wrong. But then you start seeing people buying those cards from just random players. And they're going for big money. Like Andrew Jones just sold for almost $3,000. And it was a PSA 6 or something like that in a championship. And there's cards like that sell like that all the time. I mean, but the Barclays on the now that sells for $18K. I mean, it's like an authentic, and there's authentic Raise the Roofs that are selling for $8, $9K. I mean, for Kobe, I mean, there's just those cards they're sought after. There's a reason. They're very, very cool. I think that's already cemented in. It's not going to change because our generation and some of the younger and a lot of the older are like, those are it. And so that's going to be that way for a long, 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 long time. But then ultra modern and some of these cards that are really, coming out now or, maybe in 2015, they're going to be popular too, because that generation is going to go, these are our heroes now. And that's just where I could collect them, because I couldn't get them.
Exactly.
Those.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing, like when I mean, you brought up so many good points, and like that's when we think about like, what was it during our childhood? Those are the cards that we saw in Beckett, and you're like, oh, I can't. And when you see it at like a card show, flea market, a mall card show, then you're like, whoa, because it's also the first time that you see, and that was the beauty of the 90s. You know, you break it down, like, why are 90s inserts so popular? It's like, well, you have the design, you have the first time you're seeing a design. Then you have the rarity aspect, that you hadn't seen cards serial numbered ever until, 96. And then you have the players themselves, the checklist. So then you're thinking like, oh, who are these players? They're all like superstar Hall of Famer legends. So when you have rarity, you have design, and you have the checklist. And then you actually talk about scarcity, which is different from what it is now. And scarcity in terms of a card that is numbered to, like, you have a set wells that are numbered to 100, and that's it, rather than, and it is a criticism of modern, you don't have card number to 25 to 20 to 15 to 10 to 9 to 5 and then 4 1-of-1s.
Yeah,
and
you just have 100, that's it.
So that's scarce. That's the difference between scarcity and rarity in my book. But all of those factors, when you come in, and then you name 3 cards, like, I like the Raise the Roof and the Brilliance 24 better than the PMGs. It's like, well, it's funny because those are all from Fleer, and it's like, that's why, like, Arena Design and Fleer Skybox, they were landmarks. And then you think about in the 2000s, when things started to move into game used, that's why Upper Deck Exquisite was just a landmark set in basketball, because, well, at the time, yes, it's the first time they ever you saw a card. Well, not a card. You saw a box of cards. You get 5 cards, and it sells for $500. And this is 2003. That's, the market hadn't seen that. In 2000, like, before Exquisite was Ultimate. And it's funny because Ultimate Collection in baseball started in 99, if I'm not mistaken, and it was called Ultimate Victory. It was literally a retail brand geared towards kids. They rebranded it in 01, turned it into 01 Ultimate Collection, was heavily focused on autographs. And baseball, that was the first time we saw, I think there were like 4 cards in a pack for $100. And that was a big deal in 2001. In basketball, they just upped it to $500 for 5 cards. It just so happened that in 2003, you had like the best basketball draft class with Melo, Bosch, obviously Wade, and then LeBron coming out at the same time, when they're autograph on card rookie patches numbered to 99. Then you have Jordan's, like, limited logos. You have numbered patches, exquisite. I can't even remember all the names because I'm a basketball guy, but you saw all of that, and that's why that set became so popular. And I'm really zooming in on this. It's because, like, that's another landmark set. We're talking about landmark sets for basketball, or just in general across the hobby. We talked about essential credentials. We didn't really talk why, but I think the essential credentials from 97, 98 in basketball, which would be the 98 equivalent in baseball. They're in football also. The nows and the futures, it's the first time you saw an essential credentials now and future in any sport. I mean, that design is insane. The colors are out of this world, being purple and pink, or purple and pink, and then green and yellow. Then you have the precious metal gems, and emerald and green from 97. That's the first of its kind in basketball, obviously. In football, first 10 are emerald. In football, the first 15 were. And then you have the PMG championships. Everyone knows them as PMG championships. In baseball, we just know it as PMGs because there were no PMG emeralds and greens before 98. But when you talk about those sets, like, those are landmark parallel sets, just in hobby history, because parallels weren't a thing before the 90s. And
incredible provenance. I mean, just the history to me is interesting too. This is one thing I wanted to kind of plant this little seed in your brain, and something to throw out there to everybody who listens to this episode. What's really fun, and what I find myself thinking about sometimes, is the hunt for a card like this. Like, the fact that there are undiscovered versions of all of these cards out there. We don't know where they're at. They're somewhere. They're in somebody's attic. They're in somebody's chest. They're somewhere. Some parent put them away. There's somebody that just collected. Nobody really knew they collected. Someone bought a box. It's just been sitting somewhere. We found it. We're going through with, my grandparents' house, kind of going through finding stuff that hasn't probably seen the light of day in I don't know how long. You think about that and how many cards that could be out there. There's something that's exciting about that. How there's this, it's almost like a treasure hunt that they're out there. You can go through Facebook Marketplace, different place online. You can look through to see if you can find a gem. That's a little more difficult because I think most people are kind of hip to that. But just the idea of knowing there's stuff out there that can surface, and even if you're not the one who gets it, seeing something like that surface and someone get their hands on it, it's kind of fun. Those stories are just awesome. And to me, and I mean, even if you're really not if you're not a super collector and all this, have tons of cards or not, that whole, just the hunt, the experience, you think about the journey, all that stuff to me is really, it's fun. It's interesting to me. It's like watching a documentary all the time. It's constantly living.
It's the thrill of the chase. Like that's a cliche saying, but you think about like what causes the start of your chase. And it's what we were talking about earlier. It's, well, why is this set so important? And it's like, what was this landscape of the hobby when this set was released? What design element are we seeing for the first time? Who are the players that are involved? And all of those factors come together, seeing it for the first time and never before seen design, or design that's just incredible. And it just, there was such a concentration of that in the 90s and the 2000s that it creates these landmark like parallel sets and, base sets. And then that is like when the more you learn about it, that is like feeding into your chase. And like, well, that's where the thrill of the chase has to start somewhere, because somebody has to, whether it's someone who's like, I've read about these since I was a kid, I know all about it, to someone who's just newer to the hobby. It's like, what's all the hubbub behind the 2012, and I'm going modern. What's the hubbub behind the 2012 Prism Golds? What is it? And then you learn more about it. You learn that, this was Prism's first offering of a gold parallel numbered to 10. And, first time they had the basketball license, or they released cards under basketball for Panini. And it's like, it's just those things, those little things. And then you start the chase, and it's like, oh, there was someone before you that knew all about it before you did. And then it's not just necessarily having the money to find the card or to buy the card. It is literally finding the card is like the hardest part. And then you have another obstacle to clear, which is, well, the person that you found that has the card, are they willing to sell it? And if it's usually a no, and then you're like, well, I just have to sit on this relationship, or think about, hey, to stay in touch. If he sells if he says that he's going to sell at some point, if he says he's never going to sell, then you're just like, well, I'll just have to come back to this and maybe check in like, months or years later. Because then after that, it's then maybe you get to that point where you find the card, find something that person is willing to sell. And then you're at the point of like, well, now can I buy this? Do I need to raise funds? How do I make this deal? How do I do whatever it takes? So
absolutely. Well, Rodney, we're running up against it. I wanted to keep this around 40 minutes or around 30 minutes, but you know what? This has been a great conversation, a lot of fun. I'll enjoy the chat and the different angles we take in the hobby, and different opinions we have, and just exploring, just where things have come from, where they're going. Diving in deep, great hobby talk. You can find Rodney at Rodfest on IG. You find me at PC with DPZ. You're watching the Sports Card Dad Network. I guess you call it network. We'll call it channel. It's just Dustin and I, really, at this point, mainly Dustin, but enjoying it. We enjoy having these conversations with you. Melted Wax Podcast. You can find me on YouTube. Go there. But anyway, hey, thanks for joining me. I hope you have a good rest of your weekend. And everybody, comment below. If you want to talk to Rodney about some of these sets, if you maybe have a different opinion, let's engage down below in the comments. Like, subscribe, the whole nine. Take care. Happy collecting. And we'll see you all later.
Thanks, Dennis. Thanks, you all.